On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our player reviews, and today we're talking about Brandon Hagel.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Degger. Today's episode of Locked On Lightning is brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use that code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we're continuing our player review segment, and today we are talking about Brandon Hagel. And this was one, we've already, and if you haven't watched any yet, we've already spoken about Braden Point, we've spoken about Nikita Kucherov, we've spoken about Steven Stamkos. If you haven't already, please go ahead and look back on those. And even though we spoke about the three best players offensively on paper coming into this season, already, I was really looking forward to Brandon Hagel, and I almost wanted to do him in the top three. Obviously, you want to start with Point and Kucherov. Stamkos, we've spoken about his struggles this year. Really started to get it together at the end of the season and in the playoffs. But if you really want to look at this team and look at a player who really has done a complete 180 from his previous season, look no further than Brandon Hagel. I have been really immensely impressed by the season that he had this year. Now, just to backtrack before we go over this year, last season he was brought in at the trade deadline. We expected a lot of scoring from him. He had a lot of success in Chicago. Just to recap what the Lightning were expecting from him, he played 55 games last year in Chicago, had 21 goals and 37 points. Comes to the Lightning at the trade deadline, only 4 goals and 7 points. Really not a lot of offense with him. And then we go to the playoffs, really just more of the same of just no scoring. But the thing that really I was happy to see from Hagel, and you always want to see this from players when they're struggling. We spoke about this with Steven Stamkos, how he wasn't scoring from that same circle spot that we've seen him before, but he was finding other ways to score. And we've spoken about this with other players as well, is that when a player struggles in one aspect of their game, the game where you would expect them to play the best out of and see the most production from, you want to see how they contribute in other aspects of the game. And the one thing that we could have said from last year's playoff run that really impressed us and impressed me from Brandon Hagel was really the fact that he was able to play more physical. He's not really the biggest guy on the ice. He's only 6'2", 179. Compared to other players on the ice, he looks a lot smaller than that. But that didn't stop him from going out and playing physical, laying big hits on people. And that's something that you really like to see from a guy like that, something that I would like to continue to see from him. And we were all very curious coming into this season. Were we going to see more of that, or were we going to see the score that we expected to come in from Chicago and help the Lightning? Well, we saw the score, which was really nice to see. He had 30 goals and 64 points through 81 games. He had 7 power play goals, 1 shorthanded, and 3 game-winning goals. So you really start to see the Lightning be on the fruitful side of that trade. They gave up quite a bit. They gave up Kachuk. They gave up Radish, 2 guys who were up and coming prospects who were scorers and guys who I wouldn't have minded coming into the Lightning's NHL level and playing every day, which they were. But at that time, you wanted to get someone who was more refined in their scoring, and that's what we saw from Brandon Hagel, and something that we saw this season from Brandon Hagel. And I spoke about his physicality. He had 68 hits this year, which I think for a guy like that, like I said, not very big, in my opinion. And a guy who's more so on the scoring side, I think that 68 hits is a pretty good mark for a guy like that, especially on the second line. And the one thing that we noticed, or I noticed at least, and I've spoken about it on this show, uh, especially in the later half of the season, is that Hagel could score for the most part once he gets down from the blue line. Once he gets into that high slot area, I think that the one thing with him that is pretty impressive to me is that there's no such thing with him as really a bad shot because he's so fast, he's so agile, kind of has a game that's somewhat still in the process of being refined. Kind of reminds me of sort of like a younger or still, he's like a level. He still has a lot more to accomplish before we could put him on the same level as Braden Point, but has a game that is very much like Points. Uses his legs to really get ahead of defenders and really, you know, stresses out the opposing goaltender and has really nice hands. And but the thing that really impressed me this year is that once you get into that high slot area, whether it be down the middle or on the wings, I think with Hagel, there's no such thing as a bad shot with him just because he's so skilled to where I firmly believe that he's such a good player in that aspect that if he shoots the puck and 90% of the time it's mostly for the rebound. So kind of like in basketball when you shoot the ball and you're really not trying to get it in. It's kind of like what we see in the later stages of games, where they're at the foul line, they're down by one, and you just want to try and get the rebound and put it back for another 2 points. And that's kind of like what I see from Hagel. If he doesn't see something that he likes that the goaltender is doing a good job of, I don't think really sometimes he's really trying to score. I just think more so he's looking for to shoot, so at least there's a good chance of a rebound, so you could catch the opposing goaltender out of position. And I think that's really something that we've seen this season, with Tampa Bay Lightning as a whole, that they've done a very good job of scoring down low a lot more often than I think we have seen in years past. And really, I think Hagel was a big part of that. Now, the whole season, I think that when we look at Brandon Hagel's numbers and we look at his contributions, I really think that he was a big part of that. This team, more times than not, especially down the stretch, struggling to score. And it always felt like even if he didn't score, he was always in the thick of it. And I really would like to see how next season we see sort of an evolution of that. I've spoke about it with Steven Stamkos. I spoke about it with Kucherov. I would like to see these guys as they are, somewhat in the latter stages of their career, kind of continue to develop their game. And I especially spoke about it with Braden Point, who, like I said, sort of a similar game to Hagel in terms of how they go about their job on the ice. I think that when we look at Hagel, I think that what I said for Braden Point, and like I said, if you didn't watch that or listen to that, please go ahead and watch that or listen to that episode, because you'll definitely hear somewhat of the same critiques. I think that next season, the goal for Brandon Hagel should really be to become more of a playmaker. I think that he has the skills to go out there and score, and he's talented enough to where I really think that the goals and the points will come. I think that going into his a year where he'll be turning 25, or he'll be 25 because he turns 25 in August. I think that I would like to see on a team that has enough scorers, point, we'll get the goals from Kucherov. We'll get the goals from Stamkos. Maybe not close to 40, but 30, 35 goals, I think, is a good number for Stamkos. We'll see Paul score some goals. Sorelli score some goals. I think on this team, it wouldn't hurt if Brandon Hagel turns into a little bit more of a facilitator, kind of that happy medium role between Kucherov and Point. Because, like I said, I think the goals will come. I think that he will morph into a very good 30, 35, maybe even next year if the stars align, a 40 goal scorer. But I think it's very important that he goes out there and is with the pass first mindset. Now, obviously, we want him to shoot shots, and I think that was uh, our biggest criticism, my biggest criticism for Kucherov. And I think with Hagel, that's going to have to be the kind of the growing pains with him is that the goals are going to come. We want you to pass and be able to facilitate and create chances for your teammates, which he has shown flashes that he can and that he's very capable of that. But I think that really what it comes down to it is that he needs to find that middle ground to where he understands, okay, nothing's open. Let me just shoot. Taking a shot that leads to a rebound is just as good as making a pass. So I'm very curious as to see how he evolves, uh, or especially early on next season. I'm sure that what he did during the regular season, as well as his performance in the playoffs, I think a lot of teams that grab their attention, and I'm very curious to see uh, what he will be facing, especially the obstacles early on next year, and how he could grow from that. So that is something definitely Lightning fans should be able to keep an eye on. And we'll talk about more about his game. Kind of, I don't think he really did anything wrong, as we were talking on past episodes. We've also been examining things that they could do better. I just stated that maybe being more of a playmaker, but really, I didn't have a problem with anything he did. So I think we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to talk about more, where does he belong in the lineup? Uh, who could he play with on this team that will maybe help him grow and get to that stage where we want him to be a better all-around player. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about our friends at Gametime. Now, if you haven't heard about Gametime, you got to take a look at this. It's one of the best apps to buy tickets last minute out there. Now, buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last minute tickets, their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped. I used Gametime back in April when the Lightning were in New York. I got tickets to the game last minute, and it was stress-free. They came right away, and the tickets were really not expensive at all. So you got to try this out for any sporting event, whether it be Rays games, upcoming football season with the Bucks, and of course with the Lightning season coming up as well. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So as always, I want to thank all of you for making us your first listen of the day. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow on our YouTube account. Subscribe to that channel. Hit that thumbs up button and comment below this video. How do you feel about Brayden Point's season? Is this the threshold for him, or is this what we're going to expect from him going forward, or is there still more to his game that we have not seen him tap into just yet? And my firm belief with Brandon Hagel, like I said, 30 goals this past year, 64 points, 3 game-winning goals. I like it. I like it a lot. I think that, and maybe this is just me, I think that there's room for improvement. Not saying that he didn't do anything wrong, but he's still growing, in terms of developing his game. And the best way to do that is they need to put him, and we spoke about this throughout the course of the season, and it didn't just pertain to Brandon Hagel. It was more so directed at John Cooper and his decision very stubbornly at times to keep Steven Stamkos on the first line with Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov. And as great as that is, and you always want to roll out your top guys on a line together if possible, if you feel comfortable enough that you're not going to shorthand another line, that's fine. But as we got towards the end of the season, especially, it almost seemed as though as John Cooper just flat out refused to take Stamkos off that first line. And, we saw it at certain times early in the season, especially, Hagel was on the first line with Point and Kucherov. And I think that was a big part of his success this year. And I think that, for maybe other than a couple of times here and there, I thought that when Hagel was playing at his best was when he was playing alongside Point and Kucherov. Because I think when you had those three guys playing together, I think that the opposing team really had a hard time matching up. When I've said it multiple times, Braden Point and Brandon Hagel, I think that their games are very, very similar to a certain degree. And I think that really when you have two guys that could not only score out there, but who are very good passers, and then you couple that with Nikita Kucherov, and I think that's a really tough matchup. I don't know how you really game plan for that as an opposing team. You could only do so much. You kind of have to just gamble a little bit and focus on either Point Kucherov, because you kind of have to almost go out there and say, all right, let's have Braden Point. I mean, excuse me, Brandon Hagel beat us. And there was times when he went out there and he really caused opposing teams fits. And I think that a large part of that, like I said, had to do with the fact that he was on the first line. Now, not saying that he wasn't as successful on the second line. I thought playing along Alex Killorn and Nick Paul, because Anthony Cirelli was out for a majority of the season, to start the season at least, I thought that Brandon Hagel and Alex Killorn was a very good combo in terms of wingers on your second line. And then you have Nick Paul, obviously down the middle. But next year, we don't know what that second line is going to look like. And I've said it multiple times. Brandon Hagel's turning 25 this summer, which is, it's not young in terms of human life, whatever, if you want to look at an age. It's not old either, but at the same time, unless the Lightning sign someone who is ready to slide in, if Alex Killorn doesn't end up coming back, you're going to need to have someone kind of hold down the fort on the second line in terms of just leading the way. And which is why I think, and this also goes hand in hand with where I view him in his career, I don't think Steven Stamkos is a first line forward anymore. I don't think that, especially after this season, he played well. I mean, a lot of people would kill for a 30-goal season. At the same time, I think by, like I said, John Cooper kind of being stubborn with throwing Stamkos out there on the first line, you're kind of holding back Brandon Hagel in a way, his development. I think that's the name of the game here with 38. You just want him to continue to grow, continue to develop. And plus, I would rather have a guy, the captain, be able to kind of hold down the fort in terms of leadership on that second line. Because, yeah, you're going to have Anthony Cirelli, who's a very good player, who's been in this organization for his entire career. You're going to have, who knows, on the other wing. It could be Killorn. It could be somebody else. But at the same time, regardless of who the Lightning bring in, whether it be Alex Killorn coming back or another player, I would still prefer Brandon Hagel to be on that first line. I think that his game, like I said, complements Braden Point. I think you have those two guys kind of just running ragged all over the ice, with Nikita Kucherov just being the point guard of that line, plus whomever defensive pairing you have out at that time, I think would be even a better line than if you throw Stamkos out there. This is the kind of line where, in certain situations, you got to have the energy at 100%. You got to have people skating all over the ice, really wearing down that offense. And you can't do that if the game plan with Steven Stamkos is just go out there and set him up for a one-timer, which I spoke about in the episode about him, is that sometimes, and I spoke about this during the season as well, that sometimes that holds back the team from really getting to that next gear, which we've spoken about a bunch on this show, how really, as much as you want the Lightning to go out there and set up the puck like I do, I prefer that they go. I think they're one of the best teams in the league when they go into the zone, when they set up, when they move the puck around the ice, around the zone. They can't really do that with Stamkos when everybody in the building knows where the puck is going, what the end goal of that shift is. And I think if you change things up with Braden Point there, with Brandon Hagel there as well, you could kind of mix it up. You can move guys around the ice. You don't have to keep everybody kind of where they are, because you have one guy who, I hate to say it, but is somewhat of a one-trick pony. And especially when it's not working, it's really not something that is beneficial to the team. So Brandon Hagel, I think that you put him out there, there's tons of looks you could give your team and tons of ways you could score on that first line pairing. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Is Hagel is it more beneficial to the Lightning or Brandon Hagel if he's on the first line? Do you prefer him to be on that second line? Preferably, I would prefer him to be on the first line. You stay on the first line. Steven Stamkos, it's been great. It's been real. It's been fun. But this season wasn't really fun for us to have him on that first line, especially down the stretch. So I think that you put Hagel on the first line, Kucherov gets better. You get Braden Point better, and I think it helps out the blue liners, regardless of who's on the line, on the pairing, because it allows guys to be a little bit more offensive minded, especially if you have a guy like Victor Hedman or Nick Pervix out there. Those two guys who we both know can score. I think that you add 38 to that mix. I think that opens up everything for this Lightning team. So wrapping things up for the show, once again, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Give us a follow on our YouTube page. Give us a follow on our social media pages as well. LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. Our podcast is available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're going to be continuing these player reviews until we finish up the entire team. And I really like looking back on these because it really shows how players have grown over the course of the season. And I think that if you look at any player on this Lightning team, I really think that Brandon Hagel is really just the definition of growth and development. We spoke about it early in the episode, how didn't really live up to the expectations of what he was supposed to be in that trade from Chicago, and kind of had to play a different role in the playoffs. And then fast forward to this season, really started to become the player that we thought he was going to be a year earlier, but I'm fine with it. I think he's only going to get better. And this is definitely something to look at for the people, and especially me, who is still very critical of the trade. I think everybody, if you're a Lightning fan, is very critical of this trade. The Tanner Jeannot trade. I think that as high as the expectations that we are going to have for Tanner Jeannot, I think we got to, if we're going to look at any trade as a point of reference or just as a reminder to tell ourselves, hey, we got to be patient. We got to be, optimistic about that. Julian Brees knows what he's doing, that Tanner Jeannot is going to turn it around and become the player that we thought he was going to be. And I think that we have to look at Brandon Hagel as that example. I really do. I think if we look at that and just as a reminder, I think that everything will work out. And I think that really is something that we are going to talk about a lot when we do talk about Tanner Jeannot, which, by the way, we will be talking about Tanner Jeannot on tomorrow's episode. So please go ahead and tune in for that. I really think that when we look at Jeannot, the talent's there. There's no dispute about it. I think everybody knows Jeannot's body of work and knows what he is capable of. It's only a matter of putting it all together on the ice. And like I said, look no further. The Lightning shouldn't really be strangers to this, as well as Lightning fans. Now, I know the trade situation surrounding the two players is completely different. Understandable. The Lightning gave up a lot for him, but at the same time, I mean, look at the end result. And you also got to remember that these guys are very young still. They're still very much in the development of their careers. Really, for a lot of guys, unless you are a number one draft pick, really, you don't see very often kind of what the player is going to become or really what they will be until really late in their 20s. And I think that's what really how Lightning fans should look at Brandon Hagel, should look at Tanner Jeannot, and any young player that walks through Amalie Arena in a Lightning sweater. I think that's the way you got to look at it. So, yeah, let me know in the comments below what you think about Brandon Hagel. Is he completely fine the second line? Do you think maybe he's being a little bit held back by not playing with Point and Kucherov? Do you think he's perfectly fine with Paul? And I guess we'll say for now, question mark, because I think most likely Alex Killorn will come back, but it really at the end of the day depends on him, because obviously everybody knows by now that the whole salary issue with the Lightning, it's not going away anytime soon. And in order for veterans to want to stay in Tampa Bay, they're going to have to take a little bit of cut in salary. So let us know in the comments below. And yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you next.